Give you a sketch for designs that you might want to turn into earrings or pendants or anything else that you're making. Always try it out first in polymer clay. You'll also see me use my polymer clay as a stand when I'm working on my round bead. And I think I use it again in the stone setting project to kind of hold everything still. It's really important that you keep your polymer clay separate to your silver clay. And that includes any textures. You know, if you get some polymer clay stuck on your textures, you need to remove that before you use it on your silver clay. We recommend that you only use the polymer clay that we've sent you to sketch out your designs or to hold things in place. Don't try and bake it or fire it or do anything else with it, because it can be very toxic if it's overheated. Occasionally, when you're working with your clay, you might find that it starts to dry out and crack. And you can rehydrate it as you're working, but it's very important that you don't spray any water directly onto the surface of the clay, because you'll end up with a slimy mess if you do that. So what we tend to do is put a little bit of water onto the edge of your plastic mat here, and then take a small amount on your finger onto the clay, and then give it a little while to soak in, just a few seconds. And you might well also need some more oil on your roller, because the clay with a wet surface now is going to want to stick more readily to your roller. So now we can continue rolling on down, and we'll be pushing some of that moisture down into the clay as well. Let's assume you've made some pieces and they haven't come out quite right, you're not happy with them and you want to turn them back into clay again. There's several different ways of doing this. We've got an extensive video about using a coffee bean grinder, but for small scale pieces, and if you're not going to be making an awful lot, you might not want to invest in a coffee bean grinder. So you might want to instead use a very low-tech method, and I'm going to be using a tissue blade to chop up my pieces. And you can buy these from polymer clay and a lot of the silver clay suppliers, and they sometimes come with one of these rubber holders on the end, and I find that after a while they become a little bit slippy and lose their usefulness. But you do want to be really careful and have something on this end, especially if you're going to be teaching classes, because it's easy to pick up the blade from the wrong side, and if you push down on the sharp bit, you're going to cut your fingers quite badly. So what I've started using instead is some of these are just bought from the stationery shop, and they're folder edges for binding folder papers together. And what I've done is cut them up and made some covers that will slip on, and these remain really nice and tight because they're designed to hold pieces of paper together, so they remain quite tight for you. And then if I'm travelling and I've got to pack up my toolkit, what I'll often do is flip it around and put it on the sharp side, so that I know that if that's in my bag, I'm not going to come a cropper when I stick my hand in my bag. So we're going to use that as our handle at the moment. And I'm going to chop my rejects up so that I can rehydrate them. And I'm using a ceramic tile here. You can pick these up very cheaply, you might have some hanging around. If I start doing this chopping on my work surface, I'm going to end up cutting lines and marking it. So let's go ahead and just start chopping this up. And the finer you can chop your pieces, the quicker it will reconstitute back into clay, because the moisture has to get, pinging off everywhere here, the moisture has to get in and around each one of these little lumps and soak back in. So now I'm back to a fairly fine chop here. So I'm going to take my cling film and I'm going to double up a piece. So I've taken the piece and I'm doubling it up, and this will give me a bit more strength, because I don't want the pieces to pop through the edges if I have to smush it at all. And then I'm going to add some water, and it's a bit hard to tell you exactly how much to add really. Depends on how much your sprayer sprays and how much clay you've got in here and how finely it's chopped really. It'll come with experience. So I'm going to give it a couple of sprays, and then I'm going to wrap that up and leave it to soak up that moisture. And one of the reasons that I doubled up the cling film is so that a bit later on, if I need to, I can go back in and give this a squeeze just to see how it's doing, see if I've still got any lumps in there, and if there's any sharp lumps in there, sometimes it will burst, you know, it will pop a little hole in a single sheet of cling film. So this just helps to add a bit of strength. So I'm going to leave this alone now, and in about an hour or so that should be usable again. If I find when I open it that it's too sticky and wet, then I can leave it open for a little bit and some of that moisture will evaporate off. If it's not quite pliable enough, I can add a little bit more water and give it a bit more resting time to soak back in. So there's never any waste. Anything you make that doesn't quite work out, have a good look at it before you fire it. If you're not happy with it, put it aside and go through this chopping up process, and you can just knock them out again. There's lots of different ways of doing things, so I'm going to just run through a few very basic ways of rolling out silver clay. The first, which you'll see in a lot of books, is using playing cards, and you would use these techniques when you want to get a consistent thickness for a piece, say for earrings or pendants, so it's for a flat piece with a consistent thickness. So you would take your piece of clay and place it in between the two piles of cards. There's 10 on each side here, and you would use your roller across the surface, and the cards will maintain a level height for you. And then as you roll down, you can take off your cards and keep rolling down. You can pick your clay up and turn it the other way if you need to make it wider. So there is a good case for starting with more cards than you need, so that you don't have to worry about getting it too wide or too long. You can adjust it as you go along. So quite often in books you'll see roll down your piece to 4 cards thick. That's what they're talking about. And we have figured out that if we have a stack of 10 red and 10 blue, then if they get mixed up around here, you can easily separate them into 2 piles of 10. You're not constantly counting out 10 for each pile. I'm using just a basic roller, but this could be anything. You don't have to spend a lot of money when it comes to working with silver clay. This could just as easily be a mayonnaise jar or any even thickness that you can roll with. If you find yourself producing a range of pieces, and you know that you're always going to want them to be 4 or 5 cards thick, then you could tape some cards together so that you don't have to do the taking away and counting out. So you could take them together in batches of 4 or 5, whatever you're going to most frequently use. Another way of rolling out is to use slats. These are produced and sold by a wide variety of people, and they come in different thicknesses, so you can use them a little bit like the cards, so that you can start with a thicker pile and roll down and take off as you go. So your clay would be here, you'd be rolling it down, and these will help you maintain a consistent thickness. They're also longer than your playing cards, so this gives you an advantage if you're rolling out long pieces like rings and so on. Then you've got more, you're not going to run off the end of your cards. So these slats are produced for us metal clay workers. Another thing I like to use if I'm producing large surface areas are these mat boards from Picture Framers. So they, again, I've worked these out about 1.2 mil, so you can work out how thick that relates to your cards. And it means that if I put my clay in here, I can roll in any direction to make it wider or longer as I need to, and I can stack them up and take them away and make my piece thinner and longer and so on. So this is useful for me when I've got a large surface area that I want to roll out. So that they're available from craft shops and picture framers, not very expensive and very easy to use. Here at the Jewellery School, we do insist that the back of the piece is as important as the front of the piece. And the back should be considered and well finished and consistent. It doesn't need to be highly decorated. So a good way to achieve this is to roll your clay out on top of a piece of leather. And we've included a piece for you, but you can easily find more leather in a junk shop with buying a leather coat. And we're using the side which is not suede. And we're going to oil the surface to stop the silver clay from sticking to our leather. And to do that, we use these shot glasses, and there's a little piece of sponge in here that's been soaked in olive oil, which means that when you push your finger in there, you're getting just the right amount of olive oil on the surface of your finger, not too much and not too little. When it comes time to roll your clay out, you need to make sure that you remember to put your cards on top of the leather so that you can do your rolling with an even height. If you forget and put your cards down at the side here, you're going to go way too thin because the leather itself is already about 4 or 5 cards thick. So you need to remember to keep your cards on top of the leather when you're rolling out. And I'm going to roll it down to 4 cards thick. Now I can take off several cards at a time, and I can pick up my clay and make it wider if I need to. And now I have a piece that's rolled out to a nice consistent thickness. It's 4 cards thick, and it's got a nice surface to it, and the back will be nicely textured from the leather. Common mistakes are when you take your card off. I rolled down to 4 cards thick, so I've got 6 left over in this pile here. If you make this mistake and you keep your cards close by, it's quite easy to end up rolling and not getting any thinner because your roller is actually resting on the thicker pile. So you need to be careful to keep your area clear of the ends of your rollers. The same goes for any tools that might be hanging around. You know, if I had my roller here, it's very easy to not notice that my roller's actually leaning on this. So keep your work surface, your work area clear around your card so you know you're going to roll out and get a nice consistent thickness. A little bit of oil on the surface. So the same thing applies if you're going to be using the long slats and you want a texture on the back. You could use your leather again, but we want to make sure that the slats, just like the cards, are on top of the leather, so that when I put my clay on here and roll out, I'm going to get a nice consistent even thickness. When it comes to using the mat boards, you might need a larger piece of leather. So I've got several different types that I use, and I just use a nice big one so that my mat boards will fit on top. And again, I'm going to make sure that I've got some lubrication on there to stop the clay from sticking. Remembering to keep my work area clear. And this is great because I can really decide which way I want to roll, and I've got a lot of freedom. I don't have to worry about running off the edge of my cards. Another reason I particularly like the leather is because it's a flexible work surface. It means that when it comes time to remove my piece from the leather and get it on the Teflon, I can get in there behind the piece and ease it up, ease it off the leather and onto the piece of Teflon. And I like this thickness of Teflon because I can carry it around the room. The thinner stuff that you can get from a lot of cookery shops is a little bit bendy for my particular liking, but just use whatever you've got. Now when it comes to textures, there's lots and lots of things to choose from. These commercially available textures come from all the different suppliers, sell them. But we would encourage you to move away from these as soon as you can, because everybody's got access to them. So start looking for something unique, some texture that you either make yourself. There's plenty of ways of doing that. You can use the tearaway technique, polymer clay, photopolymer plates, all kinds of things. But I like to use found textures quite often, and the local hardware store is a really good source of free textures. The wallpaper department, in England certainly, they have rolls already open so that you can tear off some and take it home to see what it would look like at home. So you can just help yourself to some of these vinyl type textures. I'm going to lightly oil with the olive oil my wallpaper, and with the cards still in place I'm going to roll that texture down into my clay. So I'm going to start in the middle and press firmly all the way up, come back to the middle, press firmly all the way down. If you go rolling back and forth, you tend to smush the texture underneath and get a bit of a ghosting going on. So now if I peel that away, you'll see we've got delicious texture under there. One thing you're going to have to learn to do when working with silver clay is to make holes in things for earrings or pendants. And there's lots of ways of doing this, so I'm going to run through quite a few different shapes and different ways of making holes and things to consider when rolling out pendants and earrings. So I'm rolling out quite a large piece of clay here so that I can cut quite a few different shapes and examples for you. And now I'm going to cut a variety of shapes to illustrate different considerations when it comes to hole making. So if I'm going to do a pair of hearts as earrings, say for instance, let's do those, and I'm cutting them with the texture running the same way, little twist to let go. And then if I'm using a shape like this which is not symmetrical, I need to be very careful to not make two left or two right earrings. So I'm going to cut my first one and then I'm going to switch around here so I'm making a matching bookend mirror image pair. I've assembled a collection of potential hole cutters here of various different sizes, and it's quite hard to find very teeny tiny small hole cutters. You could use the tip of the syringe when it's clean, and if you buy several syringes over time, you can keep the clean tips and cut them to different lengths to make a variety of different sizes because they're tapered. The tiny red straws that come with WD-40 cans are quite a good size for making small holes. And we've also got something here which is quite unlikely, which is a cotton bud. And some types of cotton bud, when you cut them in half, have a plastic straw down the middle, which is quite a nice small size. So you might want to investigate whether or not you've got a brand near you that you could use for this. I've also got one of these nesting tube sets from Sealy Fago, which is a beautiful thing, and it's a series of consecutively smaller and smaller hole cutters that rest on this nice holder for you. So you might find that there's a good size here to make some holes. In all likelihood, these large drinking straws are going to be too big for most small earrings. So we're going to look at the shapes that we've got here and consider how they're going to hang when we make our holes in them. The pendant that I've got here might well take a straw this size, so I'm going to make my hole fairly near the top here. I'm going to go in, little twist to release the edges and pluck it out. And I can remove this with a toothpick, poking it down there and get that back up so I'm not wasting anything. So there's my little excess piece that I can now wrap up. And I need to consider carefully where I'm going to make my holes in these other pieces. I've cut a matching bookend pair here, so I need to make the holes in roughly the same place and think about how they're going to hang. So a little hole there, poke out the excess. Same here. When it comes to heart shapes, you need to be very careful about how they hang. If you make your hole in the middle here and you're even slightly off, it will hang off center. So quite often, if I'm going to use hearts at all, I would tend to intentionally make them hang off center, so that there's no doubt about how they should be hanging. So if I make a hole in this side, then I need to be very careful not to make the hole here, because I'd end up with two earrings that hang the same way, which would not be a matching bookend pair. So I need to make my hole in the opposite side so that I end up with a matching bookend pair. Okay? So I'll turn that round so it's a little bit more obvious to you. And these are various different ways of making holes and things to consider. Your safest bet is going to be to make earrings that are a consistent symmetrical shape and put the hole in the same place in each one and have the texture running the same way in each one. I'm going to go ahead and make my hole in this piece with the 1.5mm drill bit, and I'm going to work on a playing card because I can manoeuvre it about a bit easier, and I'm going to make a little pencil mark where I want to make my hole, so I've got something to aim for. And if I was doing two earrings, if I was doing two pieces, I would put the earrings right next to each other and mark both of them so that I know that I'd be aiming for the same spot. It gives me a bit of guidance. So I need to now get in there with my drill bit, and